Remember the 90s? Well, it was a different world. There were tons of popular foods back then that would raise serious red flags today. So, let's take a look at 25 food items that are illegal now, but were normal to eat in the 90s. Back in the 1990s, it wasn't unusual for a kid to crack open a hollow chocolate egg and find a toy tucked neatly inside. Kinder Surprise eggs, the original version, were more than just a candy. They were a mini adventure. Created by the Italian company Ferrero in 1974, they didn't make their way into US stores due to regulations, but they were still widely consumed across Europe and even smuggled into American lunchboxes during family vacations. The concept was simple. A milk chocolate shell wrapped around a yellow plastic capsule containing a small toy, often needing assembly. Parents and kids alike loved the novelty, and the toys became collectible, with some series even fetching high prices on collector markets today. But here's where the story turns. The US banned these eggs under the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which prohibits embedding non-edible items inside food. Turns out, wrapping a plastic object inside something meant to be eaten raised enough choking hazard concerns to keep them off American shelves. The US version today, Kinder Joy, separates the toy from the treat. But for many, it's just not the same. Long before energy drinks had their own aisle, there was a neon-colored can that promised a wild night and delivered on every ounce. Foie Loko, in its original formula, hit the scene in 2005, though its roots trace back to the early 2000s college culture that demanded convenience, cost efficiency, and chaos, all in one beverage. The drink combined high alcohol content with caffeine, taurine, and guarana, essentially creating a cocktail that could both speed you up and slow you down at the same time. It earned the nickname Blackout in a Can for a reason. Though not technically a 90s product, its cultural groundwork was laid in the late 90s when pre-mixed, ready-to-drink beverages began gaining traction. Foie Loko didn't need to be prepared. You popped the tab and braced yourself. Often sold in 23.5-ounce cans, it packed up to 12% alcohol by volume. That's about the same as 4 beers, plus the caffeine equivalent of a few cups of coffee. It was cheap, potent, and easy to overlook the strength until it was too late. The FDA stepped in by 2010, issuing warning letters and prompting manufacturers to remove caffeine from the formula. There was a time when ordering a burger medium rare at a fast food joint didn't raise eyebrows or red flags. In the 1990s, rare burgers at fast food chains weren't just tolerated, they were part of the norm in some regions. Before the E. coli outbreaks that changed the landscape of food safety, undercooked ground beef wasn't seen as a public health concern on the scale we understand today. Chains like Jack in the Box even served burgers with a pink center until 1993, when a deadly outbreak sickened hundreds and led to multiple fatalities, most of them children. The issue wasn't in the prep, it was in the grind. Ground beef mixes surface bacteria throughout the meat, unlike a steak where pathogens live mostly on the exterior. When rare burgers were grilled quickly for that juicy bite, harmful bacteria had a better chance of surviving. The fast-paced kitchen environment, combined with looser regulations, made consistent internal temperatures hard to guarantee. After the outbreak, the USDA enforced stricter guidelines, requiring fast food establishments to cook ground beef to at least 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, that pink center has been swapped for safety. You can still get a rare burger, but only at establishments willing to grind meat in-house and accept the liability. At the height of fast food's portion-size arms race, McDonald's rolled out its infamous supersize option, an upgrade that made large look modest by comparison. Introduced nationally in the early 1990s, supersize fries and drinks weren't just menu items. They were cultural icons of excess. For an extra 39 cents, customers could tack on over 600 calories to their meal, turning a quick bite into a small feast. The fries came in cartons big enough to be mistaken for mailboxes, while the sodas? Let's just say they had more fluid ounces than a bottle of wine. Fast food chains were competing to offer more for less, and customers were more than happy to supersize everything from meals to their waistband measurements. The preparation process didn't change, just the quantity. The fries were the same golden sticks of salt and oil, but now in amounts better suited for sharing or not. It all came to a halt in 2004. Following increasing scrutiny over portion sizes and health concerns, plus the release of Super Size Me, a documentary that connected the dots between fast food and rising obesity rates, McDonald's pulled the plug. For kids growing up in the 1990s, few things rivaled the thrill of opening a fast food meal and discovering a plastic toy inside. Whether it was a miniature transformer, a movie tie-in figurine, or one of those oddly satisfying spinning tops, the toy often outshined the burger itself. These plastic freebies weren't just fun, they were strategic. Chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's used them to build brand loyalty young and early. But here's the twist. Back then, many of these toys were distributed without explicit choking hazard labels, even when they contained small, detachable parts. The appeal was obvious. The toys were produced cheaply, shipped globally, and bundled into value meals with no preparation. Just insert, seal, and serve. For the companies, it was a marketing goldmine. For parents, it was an easy win at the dinner table. But for regulators, it became a growing concern. By the late 90s and early 2000s, a number of child injuries and even fatalities linked to toy-related choking incidents prompted stricter federal oversight. The Consumer Product Safety Commission began enforcing labeling requirements more aggressively, especially for items marketed to kids under 3. In the 1990s, Americans unknowingly became participants in one of the largest food experiments in modern history. Unlabeled GMO ingredients, short for genetically modified organisms, entered the food supply with little fanfare and even less consumer awareness. Engineered for pest resistance or higher crop yield, GMOs were introduced to combat rising agricultural costs and food insecurity. Corn and soy were among the first to be modified, and since those two staples found their way into everything from cereals to salad dressings, most people were consuming GMOs daily without ever realizing it. These ingredients were grown like traditional crops, processed in the same way, and incorporated seamlessly into the food system. The only real difference was at the cellular level and the absence of a label. At the time, the FDA ruled that GMO foods didn't require separate identification if they were substantially equivalent to their conventional counterparts. But consumer pushback eventually caught up. By the 2010s, mounting demand for transparency, along with legal pressure, led to changes. In 2016, Congress passed a mandatory labeling law, and by 2022, food products containing genetically modified ingredients had to disclose that information, though now it often appears under the softer term bioengineered. In the 1990s, the school vending machine was a sacred institution, an oasis of sugar and fizz wedged between algebra and gym class. Stocked top to bottom with candy bars, neon-colored fruit snacks, and enough soda to fill a kiddie pool, these machines weren't just tolerated, they were profitable. Districts under budget pressure often signed exclusive contracts with beverage companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, trading cafeteria wall space for much-needed funding. The machines weren't just snacks, they were financial lifelines. There was no mystery in preparation. Press a button, get a Snickers. Cold soda clanked into your hands like victory. Students consumed the contents between classes, during lunch, and, if the hall monitor looked the other way, mid-lecture. For many schools, vending machines became an unofficial part of the lunch program. But the sugar rush came to an end. As childhood obesity rates climbed and public health experts raised alarms, policy shifted. In 2004, the Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act pushed wellness policies into schools. By 2010, the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act gave the USDA authority to regulate what was sold during school hours. During the height of America's fat phobia craze in the 1990s, consumers were told fat was the enemy, and Snackwell's fat-free cookies were the shining savior. Launched in 1992 by Nabisco, these treats flew off grocery shelves, marketed as a guilt-free indulgence for health-conscious snackers. With bright green packaging and the promise of being fat-free, they seemed like the perfect compromise. Dessert without the dietary damage. What wasn't front and center, though, was the heavy reliance on partially hydrogenated oils, aka trans fats. The preparation wasn't revolutionary in appearance or taste, but the formula was engineered to replace fats with sugar and processed oils that mimicked mouthfeel. The cookies were soft, chewy, and addictive, which led many consumers to overindulge, assuming fat-free meant risk-free. Ironically, while Snackwells were a symbol of healthy eating in the 90s, the trans fats they contained were later found to significantly raise bad cholesterol and increase the risk of heart disease. By the early 2000s, scientific research and growing public concern pushed the FDA to act. In the 1990s, before flavored tobacco came under national scrutiny, Clove cigarettes were seen as a countercultural badge, exotic, aromatic, and often mistaken for harmless alternatives to standard smokes. Imported primarily from Indonesia and sold under names like Jarum, these unfiltered clove cigarettes blended tobacco with ground cloves and a sweet, sometimes candy-like flavoring. The scent was unmistakable, part incense, part spice rack, and the experience was marketed as smoother, trendier, and somehow more artistic than lighting up a Marlboro. Despite being cigarettes in every sense, their packaging and flavor often appealed to younger consumers. Some retailers even shelved them near novelty items or incense, giving off an illusion of safety or at least ambiguity. They required no preparation, just strike a match, and were typically consumed by puff rather than inhalation, though that distinction rarely stuck. Health agencies began to raise alarms about their chemical composition. Not only did they still contain nicotine and tar, but the clove oil also numbed the throat, which could mask the body's natural reaction to smoke inhalation. In 2009, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act banned flavored cigarettes, including clove, on the grounds that they appealed disproportionately to youth. Baseball cards, slap bracelets, and a pouch of shredded bubblegum, that was the trifecta of playground cool in the 1990s. Big League Chew, launched in 1980, was marketed as a fun, family-friendly alternative to chewing tobacco. It mimicked the look of dip, came in a foil pouch, and offered bold flavors like grape and watermelon. Alongside it, candy cigarettes, chalky white sugar sticks, sometimes with a red tip, offered kids the chance to imitate grown-up habits under the harmless guise of confectionery. Both were consumed casually, no prep required. Rip the pouch or open the box, and the role play began. These items weren't accidents of design, they were directly inspired by adult tobacco products. At the time, the goal was relatability, not rebellion. Big League Chew even had the backing of former baseball players who wanted to replace actual dip with something safer in the dugout. Over time, public health researchers began linking these mimic products with normalization of tobacco use among youth. By the late 1990s and into the 2000s, increasing pressure from parents, health advocates, and lawmakers forced changes. Before taurine and B vitamins dominated the energy drink aisle, another stimulant quietly fueled the late-night study sessions and early gym grinds of the 1990s: Ephedra. Often found in energy drinks, diet supplements, and workout enhancers, Ephedra was derived from a plant used in traditional Chinese medicine. It wasn't the caffeine that gave these drinks their punch. It was the ephedrine alkaloids, which stimulated the nervous system, increased heart rate, and promised everything from rapid weight loss to laser-sharp focus. In the world of 90s supplements, it was marketed as natural energy, though its side effects were anything but subtle. The drinks came prepackaged, typically in small cans or plastic bottles, ready to chug before a workout or a night out. Many users combined them with coffee, unaware that they were layering powerful stimulants. Popular among athletes, club-goers, and overworked students, ephedra-based products didn't just sell well, they developed a cult following. Tucked into custards, cookies, and creams, artificial vanilla was a quiet staple in countless 1990s desserts. But what many didn't know was that some of this flavor came from Tonka beans, a fragrant seed native to Central and South America, known for its rich, complex aroma. The compound responsible, coumarin, mimics vanilla with earthy, spiced undertones and was prized for being cheaper than the real thing. Ground Tonka beans were occasionally used in boutique food production or imported flavorings, especially in international markets. For a while, it was the secret star behind some unusually aromatic vanilla extracts. Preparation was straightforward. The beans were dried, ground, and used in small quantities. Though the flavor was potent, it only took a dash to elevate a dessert. But therein lay the danger. Coumarin, in higher doses, was found to cause liver damage in animal studies, and the FDA took no chances. As early as 1954, the use of Tonka beans in food was banned in the US, but enforcement was inconsistent. By the 1990s, increased food safety inspections brought it under stricter regulation. While the ban remains in effect, Tonka beans are still legal to possess and use in non-edible products like perfumes. Few flavors capture 1990s snack culture quite like the electric punch of blue raspberry. Bright, tangy, and entirely fictional, since raspberries aren't actually blue, the flavor was a marketing invention, and its visual signature came courtesy of FD and C Blue No. 1. Found in everything from freezer pops to gummy sharks, powdered drinks, and sour straws, this synthetic dye gave snacks their neon glow and helped brands stand out in crowded grocery aisles. It wasn't just added for color, it was added for identity. The process was industrially simple. The dye was mixed directly into the syrup, batter, or gelatin base during manufacturing. The result? Snacks that could stain your tongue for hours and your fingers for longer. Kids loved it. Parents tolerated it. Regulators eventually took a closer look. Though Blue No. 1 was approved by the FDA in 1969, it came under increased scrutiny in the late 1990s and early 2000s due to rising concerns about synthetic dyes and their potential links to hyperactivity in children. European regulators began requiring warning labels or replacing it entirely. In the US, while not banned, manufacturers were pressured to reduce heavy concentrations, especially in foods targeted at young children. Long before avocado oil made its debut on menus and soybean oil earned a health-conscious makeover, fast food kitchens across America ran on hydrogenated oils. These oils, solid at room temperature and remarkably shelf-stable, were the industry's workhorse, used to fry everything from chicken nuggets to French fries. In the 1990s, cooking with hydrogenated oils wasn't just common, it was considered smart business. They were inexpensive, reusable, and extended the life of deep fryers, making them ideal for high-volume operations. The oils were prepared in bulk, heated to high temperatures and used repeatedly throughout the day. Foods cooked in them came out with that signature golden crispness, and the flavor? Addictive. For years, the health risks were underplayed or poorly understood, but mounting clinical evidence combined with pressure from public health advocates led the FDA to act. In 2006, mandatory trans fat labeling was introduced. Then, in 2015, the FDA declared partially hydrogenated oils unsafe for consumption. By 2018, most fast food chains had reformulated their cooking methods. Pressed against a cracker or sprayed directly onto a celery stick, few products summed up 1990s convenience culture quite like aerosol cheese. Brands like Easy Cheese brought spray cheese into pantries across America, where it became a staple for after-school snacks and camping trips alike. Marketed as pasteurized processed cheese spread, it offered a shelf-stable, no refrigeration-required alternative to traditional dairy. What it didn't offer, especially in its earlier days, was ingredient transparency. The can's label was vague at best, often listing terms like cheese culture, milk solids, and emulsifying salts, while sidestepping specifics on food coloring, stabilizers, or artificial flavor compounds. It was technically cheese, or at least cheese-adjacent, thanks to a minimum requirement of real dairy. Preparation was as simple as pressing the nozzle, and the product emerged with a satisfying hiss and a texture somewhere between whipped cream and molten plastic. For years, this kind of labeling met the basic standards of the time. But as consumer demand for clarity grew and nutrition science advanced, regulators tightened the rules. The FDA began enforcing more rigorous disclosure requirements for processed foods, especially those containing additives, artificial dyes, and modified dairy components. Tucked beside a scoop of canned corn and a chocolate milk carton, few school lunch items sparked more debate than the humble rectangle of cafeteria pizza. In the 1990s, this cheesy slab didn't just count as a main course, it occasionally doubled as a vegetable. That's because under USDA nutritional guidelines at the time, a few tablespoons of tomato paste could technically qualify as a vegetable serving. And since pizza had sauce, well, mission accomplished. These frozen pizzas were mass-produced, reheated in bulk, and served daily in schools across the country. They were inexpensive, easy to portion, and, perhaps most critically, students actually ate them. In districts with tight budgets and rising demands for calorie-rich meals, it was seen as a practical win. But nutrition experts didn't agree. Critics pointed out that high sodium, saturated fat, and minimal fresh produce weren't exactly promoting lifelong health. The issue resurfaced in 2011, when proposed changes to school meal regulations attempted to strike pizza's veggie status from the record. Throughout the 1990s, corner stores and swap meets across the U.S. offered a colorful array of imported candies, often from Mexico, Southeast Asia, and Central America. With bold flavors like tamarind, mango chili, and sour plum, these sweets offered something different from the typical chocolate bar or lollipop. But beneath the foil, there was a hidden danger. Several of these unregulated imported candies were packaged in wrappers containing lead-based inks or dyes, sometimes even using recycled newspaper material for wrapping. The risk wasn't in the candy recipe itself, but in the packaging leaching toxic residue onto the product over time. These candies were consumed just like any other, ripped open and eaten on the go, often by children, the demographic most vulnerable to lead poisoning. Many importers at the time didn't have to meet U.S. safety or labeling standards, especially if the candy was being sold informally or through non-chain retailers. As public awareness grew, import regulations tightened. The FDA eventually caught on after a series of studies in California found lead levels well above federal limits in several popular brands. Weight loss in the 1990s often came with a jingle and a shake. SlimFast, the meal replacement brand that promised a shake for breakfast, a shake for lunch, and a sensible dinner, was everywhere. Backed by television ads and shelves full of ready-to-drink cans and powders, it offered a convenient way to drop pounds without counting calories or cooking meals. What wasn't emphasized, however, was its heavy reliance on artificial sweeteners like aspartame and sucralose, ingredients now facing closer scrutiny. SlimFast products were designed for ease. Mix with milk or open a can, chill it, drink it. No prep, no cleanup. Their sweet taste masked the fact that sugar content was kept low by design, replaced with synthetic alternatives to maintain flavor without added calories. In the 90s, this was celebrated as science-forward nutrition. But over time, concerns began to grow. While the FDA approved these sweeteners for use, more recent studies have questioned their long-term effects on metabolism, gut health, and even appetite regulation. Several countries have placed limits or warning labels on products containing certain artificial sweeteners, and health advocacy groups have called for clearer labeling in the U.S. Throughout the 1990s, school cafeterias across the country relied on efficiency and bulk prep to keep lunch lines moving, and that often meant tuna salad sitting out in metal trays long before the first bell rang. Packed with mayonnaise and scooped in advance, tuna salad was a cafeteria classic. Cheap, protein-rich, and easy to portion onto white bread or a bed of iceberg lettuce. But food safety standards at the time were far more relaxed, and cold chain management often fell victim to outdated refrigeration or staffing shortages. The preparation was minimal: canned tuna, commercial mayo, and sometimes a token addition of celery or relish. Once made, it was stored in large trays, sometimes uncovered, often at room temperature for hours. By today's standards, that's a bacterial buffet. Listeria and salmonella thrive in protein-rich, perishable foods left in the so-called danger zone, between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. As foodborne illness tracking improved in the early 2000s, regulations tightened. The USDA and local health departments began enforcing stricter time and temperature controls for school meal programs. Weight loss in the 1990s wasn't limited to shakes or gym memberships. It also came steeped in boiling water. Non-FDA-approved weight loss teas surged in popularity during the decade, promising rapid results through natural ingredients. Sold in health food stores, late-night infomercials, and even gas stations, these teas claimed to detoxify, flatten stomachs, and flush away fat. The fine print, if it existed, usually hid one important detail. Many of these brews were little more than aggressive laxatives. Preparation was straightforward. Steep a bag in hot water, drink before bed, and brace for morning. Popular brands included ingredients like senna, cascara sagrada, and other herbal diuretics. Consumers often interpreted the resulting bathroom marathons as evidence the tea was working rather than what it actually was. Severe dehydration and digestive irritation masquerading as weight loss. Because they were marketed as dietary supplements, these teas bypassed FDA approval and quality control. Adverse reports began mounting: cramping, electrolyte imbalances, even hospitalizations in extreme cases. In response, the FDA began cracking down in the early 2000s, issuing warnings and pulling especially dangerous products from shelves. In dorm rooms, office break rooms, and kitchens on tight budgets, few items were as universally relied upon in the 1990s as instant ramen. Cheap, fast, and shelf-stable, it delivered flavor on demand, thanks largely to one key ingredient: monosodium glutamate, better known as MSG. Long before nutrition labels required full transparency, these MSG-laden noodles were consumed by the crate, with little awareness of what was actually inside those shiny silver seasoning packets. Preparation was a breeze. Boil water, add noodles, stir in the powder, and in 3 minutes, dinner was served. The flavor hit hard because MSG enhances umami, that savory depth found naturally in meats and broths. In processed ramen, it helped mask the lack of fresh ingredients and created a crave-worthy taste profile that kept consumers coming back. During the 90s, MSG wasn't regulated the way it is today. Though the FDA considered it generally recognized as safe, there were no requirements to disclose exact quantities, and international brands often had looser standards. Today, MSG is still used, but it's usually disclosed, often minimized, and occasionally swapped out for yeast extract or other enhancers. Before vacuum sealing machines became common and dehydrators came with built-in safety timers, home-packaged jerky in the 1990s was often made with little more than a conventional oven, some marinade, and a generous amount of guesswork. Whether sold at flea markets, roadside stands, or packed in lunchboxes, this homemade snack was a hit with hunters, hikers, and anyone seeking portable protein. What it often lacked, however, was any adherence to preservation standards, leaving it susceptible to bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli. Jerky preparation typically began with raw meat sliced thin, soaked in a salt-heavy or spiced marinade, and then dried, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight, depending on the maker's method. But drying alone isn't enough. Without reaching and maintaining safe internal temperatures, pathogens could survive the process. And in many homemade batches, refrigeration was skipped altogether under the assumption that jerky was naturally preserved. As foodborne illness tracking improved in the late 90s, cases linked to improperly handled jerky led health officials to sound the alarm. Bright enough to glow under diner lighting and sweet enough to overpower a cocktail, Maraschino cherries were a staple of desserts, drinks, and ice cream sundaes throughout the 1990s. But behind that fire truck red hue was a heavy dose of synthetic dye, often FD and C-Red No. 40, applied in concentrations far exceeding what would be considered acceptable today. Originally preserved in maraschino liqueur, the American version evolved into a completely different product, bleached, brined, sweetened, and dyed into uniform, candy-like perfection. The process involved soaking real cherries in a calcium chloride and sulfur dioxide solution to remove color and flavor, then reintroducing both using high fructose syrup and food dye. The result was a product with visual appeal and shelf stability ideal for mass food service. But in an effort to keep them vivid for months, sometimes years, manufacturers leaned hard on artificial coloring, especially for bulk supply to cafeterias, bakeries, and bars. As consumer awareness about food dyes grew in the early 2000s, studies began linking high levels of certain artificial colors to hyperactivity in children and potential allergic reactions. Beneath the glossy wrapper and creamy allure lay a darker chapter in the story of imported treats. In the 1990s, Kinder Chocolate, an iconic confection cherished by families, traveled across oceans to satisfy America's sweet tooth. Renowned for its smooth texture and delicate taste, this chocolate was a symbol of European quality and innovation. Yet behind its irresistible appeal lurked an unintended hazard: excess lead traces found in some imported batches. Chocolate was meticulously crafted from high-quality cocoa and milk, blended with a secret recipe, then shipped in bulk. Consumers enjoyed it as a convenient snack or a special treat for children, unaware of its hidden risks. Interestingly, manufacturers had long prided themselves on a careful production process, yet the lack of stringent testing protocols on imported products allowed contamination to slip by unnoticed. Lead, a toxic metal with no safe threshold for consumption, posed severe health risks, particularly for children, who were the primary target of such confections. As reports emerged and consumer safety advocacy intensified, U.S. regulatory agencies stepped in. In an era when energy drinks hadn't yet flooded store shelves, one soda dared to do what others wouldn't: double the caffeine and proudly announce it. Jolt Cola hit the market in the mid-1980s and found its stride in the 1990s when tech workers, students, and gamers embraced its bold tagline, "All the sugar and twice the caffeine." It wasn't subtle, and that was exactly the point. At a time when most colas had around 35 milligrams of caffeine per can, Jolt packed up to 72 milligrams, comparable to a cup of coffee, but with fizz, corn syrup, and youthful rebellion. It was consumed straight from the bottle, often chilled, and frequently in multiples. Jolt became a fixture in college dorms and startup offices, where sleep was optional and deadlines were absolute. It wasn't marketed as healthy, it was marketed as necessary. But as the decade wore on, concerns grew. Studies began linking excessive caffeine intake in adolescence to sleep disruption, elevated heart rates, and behavioral changes. Regulatory agencies didn't outright ban Jolt, but evolving pressure from watchdog groups, shifting consumer trends, and increased labeling standards led to a gradual fade from mainstream shelves. When desperation tightened its grip in the Great Depression, even the backyard robins and sparrows became fair game. Commonly known as songbirds, these feathered neighbors found themselves starring unwillingly in Depression-era dishes. Families employed homemade snares, nets, and carefully aimed slingshots to secure their tiny meals. Once captured, the birds, typically robins, sparrows, or blackbirds, were plucked, gutted, and roasted whole over open fires or baked with potatoes and onions into miniature pies. Interestingly, a 1930s household recipe even recommended skewering songbirds, seasoning lightly, and cooking rapidly, likely the original, less glamorous predecessor to today's fancy hors d'oeuvres. But this culinary trend, born purely of necessity rather than preference, soon faced heavy legal scrutiny. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, established earlier but strictly enforced post-Depression, outlawed hunting, capturing, or consuming migratory songbirds to prevent their declining populations. Today, violating these regulations could result in hefty fines or even imprisonment, making songbird skewers a costly dish indeed. The saga of lawn darts, or jarts, as they were colloquially known, is a somber chapter in toy history. Introduced in the 1960s, these metal-tipped darts, intended for outdoor play, soon revealed a darker side. After causing numerous injuries and tragically fatalities, lawn darts were banned in 1988 in the United States. This ban served as a watershed moment in toy safety, illustrating the critical need for oversight and regulation in children's playthings. The story of lawn darts remains a powerful reminder of the responsibilities manufacturers and regulators bear in ensuring the well-being of young enthusiasts. Jell-O gelatin is a pretty tasty treat for an even better price for those who remember it. But did you know how many artificial sweeteners and harmful dyes were loaded in this one? If the past few names on the list were bad to you, then this might cause you to stop and think for a bit. A lot of additional stuff used in the gelatin, especially lots of food dyes for its various different flavors, were pretty harmful and caused skin issues as well as bloating, stomach discomfort, and nausea. With the way people consumed them, these otherwise lighter symptoms spiraled out to the point where, long-term, people's immune systems were going down the drain. This made them vulnerable to a lot more than just one specific type of health nightmare. Luckily, there was a push for gelatin products with no food dyes in the market, and brands like Kroger responded with new lines of Jell-O without all the worrisome fake stuff. In the 1970s, grabbing a cold soda meant reaching for a thick glass bottle with bold, colorful branding baked right onto the surface. Those logos and labels weren't just stickers. They were printed directly onto the glass using bright, long-lasting enamel paints. The problem was, many of those paints contained lead, and every sip from the bottle meant a potential exposure to toxic heavy metals. Lead-based paints had been used for decades because they were durable, resisted fading, and made the logos pop. No one thought twice about it. You'd twist off the cap, take a swig, and maybe even collect the empty bottles for a few cents at the local store. Kids played with them, stacked them up, or even used them for makeshift science experiments. But the real science was happening in labs, where researchers began linking lead exposure to serious health risks, especially for children. By the late 20th century, regulations started phasing out lead in household products, including paint, gasoline, and eventually soda bottles. By the early 1990s, U.S. manufacturers had moved to safer alternatives. Today, soda branding is mostly done with paper or plastic labels, but for those who remember the old glass bottles, they were a piece of pop culture, with a little extra toxicity on the side. Before neatly packaged pork chops arrived wrapped in cellophane at supermarkets, families in Depression-era America took matters and meat cleavers into their own hands. Home-slaughtered pigs without inspection weren't just rural tradition, they were economic necessity. A direct route from the backyard pig pen to dinner plates nationwide. Neighbors often gathered together, turning butchering day into a social event, perhaps the original farm-to-table movement, minus the trendy menus. Pork cuts were carefully salted, smoked, cured, or canned in cellars without official oversight, and sausages stuffed by hand provided protein all winter. Interestingly, nearly every part found a use, including rendering fat for lard or transforming scraps into sausage, a testament to Depression-era thriftiness. Yet these home-slaughtered practices carried hidden dangers. Unsupervised slaughter led to contamination risks, including trichinosis outbreaks and food poisoning incidents that pushed authorities toward regulation. Today, selling home-slaughtered pork without USDA inspection isn't just risky. It's illegal nationwide, intended to protect public health and ensure humane animal treatment standards. Then, the tale of the Cabbage Patch Kids Snacktime Kids dolls, a late 90s sensation, brings a modern twist to our nostalgic journey. These dolls, designed to eat snacks fed by their young owners, captured hearts until an unforeseen hazard emerged. The mechanism that enabled this unique feature also posed a risk of entangling children's fingers and hair, leading to a recall in 1997. This incident highlights the ongoing challenges faced by toy manufacturers and regulators in ensuring the safety of innovative toys, a reminder of the delicate balance between creativity and caution in the world of children's playthings. Another delicacy that is native to West Africa is Ackee fruit, which in Jamaica is a widely consumed treat and is even their national fruit, but in America is currently banned by the FDA. This is all because Ackee fruit, as tasty and soft as it can be, contains hypoglycin, which is a toxin that can cause an allergic reaction you really would not see coming. Let's just say it feels like one of the worst hangovers of your life, and that may be why the sickness caused by Ackee fruit has a name. In the world of medicine, it is lovingly referred to as Jamaican vomiting sickness, but do not let pretenses fool you. If too much of it is consumed when it is very ripe, the fruit can very well be fatal. Hence why there's such a tight ban on it. Mornings in the 1970s often started the same way. Parents sipping their coffee, kids getting ready for school, and, in many households, children drinking coffee right alongside the adults. It wasn't unusual. In fact, in some families it was encouraged, especially in certain cultural traditions where a little coffee with milk and sugar was considered perfectly fine for young ones. Some parents even believed it helped build character or made kids feel more grown up. Coffee for kids wasn't just about the caffeine, it was part of breakfast. Some children dunked their toast into it, while others drank a watered-down version, often loaded with sugar. It wasn't uncommon for grandparents to pour a little into a toddler's bottle, swearing it would keep them calm, an idea that hasn't exactly aged well. But as health studies evolved, concerns over caffeine's effects on developing bodies became harder to ignore. Doctors warned that regular consumption could stunt growth, interfere with sleep, and even lead to increased heart rates. While coffee itself was never banned for kids, the cultural norm slowly faded. Today, it's more likely to raise eyebrows than fill sippy cups. But back then, a cup of joe before school wasn't shocking. It was just part of growing up, one jittery sip at a time. While city rats today might prompt a frantic call to pest control, desperate times during the Great Depression transformed these rodents from street menace to last resort protein. Eating rat meat wasn't common practice, but urban families facing starvation did indeed resort to capturing and cooking these widely detested animals. Rat meat required meticulous cleaning, soaking in brine or vinegar, and thorough cooking at high temperatures, usually roasted or simmered into stews heavily seasoned to disguise its origins. Historical accounts indicate that rat dinners emerged mostly from extreme necessity rather than culinary experimentation, with some cooks humorously admitting the biggest challenge was convincing diners it tasted almost like rabbit, provided they didn't think too hard about it. Naturally, health concerns arose from consuming urban rodents, notorious carriers of disease. Think plague and leptospirosis, conditions more serious than indigestion after Thanksgiving dinner. These legitimate dangers pushed health authorities to unequivocally declare rat meat illegal and unsafe, permanently closing down any possibility of a rat roast revival. Modern laws reflect clear public health priorities, strictly forbidding consumption of rodents, classifying them as dangerous vermin rather than viable food sources. The slip and slide, another Wham-O classic, epitomizes summer fun with its straightforward yet exhilarating concept. This water-lubricated slide offers an adrenaline rush as users glide across the lawn. Yet, it's accompanied by a cautionary note, especially for adult users, due to recalls linked to severe spinal and neck injuries. This situation illuminates the complexities of toy design, stressing the necessity for age-appropriate products and explicit usage guidelines. Despite these challenges, the slip and slide remains a beloved fixture of summer, symbolizing the toy industry's dedication to merging enjoyment with safety, ensuring playtime is both thrilling and secure for every age. This trend of exhausting an entire populations of animals for culinary thrills had spread to a lot more than just life beneath the sea. An example is foie gras, which was created by having ducks and geese go through a rather harmful diet of corn. To the point, they were force-fed the corn to ensure that they were fattened up properly. The damage this did to their livers cannot be stated in simple words, but the livers were the main part, so the market saw no reason to stop its routines. California was one of the first states to step up about it and ban this activity, even though the move got backlash. But even the Supreme Court rejected a case for removing the ban. Hopefully, the rest of the country takes a hint too, because the act of foie gras is quite unethical. Fortunately, most states have now banned force-fed and harmful diets for animals and thus automatically deemed foie gras illegal. Autumn day in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trip to the local farm stand. fresh apples, homemade pies, and of course, a jug of unpasteurized apple cider, cloudy, rich, and straight from the press. It was a seasonal tradition, the kind of drink you poured into a glass and sipped cold, or warmed up on the stove with a cinnamon stick. No labels, no expiration dates, just fresh pressed fruit in its purest form. For generations, farm-fresh juices were a staple, especially in rural areas where people trusted their local orchards. The juice was made by simply crushing fruit and collecting the liquid. No heat treatment, no extra processing, and because it wasn't filtered, it had that distinct, pulpy texture that store-bought juice just couldn't match. But as food safety research advanced, so did concerns over harmful bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Unpasteurized juice, while natural, carried risks, especially for children and the elderly. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, requiring warning labels and, in many cases, pasteurization for commercial sale. While you can still find raw cider at some farm stands, it often comes with a disclaimer. If you've ever watched a raccoon tip over your garbage cans, you might find it hard to imagine inviting one to dinner. Yet, during the Great Depression, resourceful cooks did exactly that, preparing raccoon meat as routinely as chicken. Back then, hunting or trapping raccoons wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. Cookbooks advised carefully cleaning and soaking the meat overnight, typically in vinegar or salt water, to remove the greasy, gamey flavor before roasting it with sweet potatoes or simmering it into a hearty stew. Interestingly, raccoon was even featured prominently in community cook-offs and rural Sunday dinners, considered delicious enough to appear in popular recipes alongside pork and beef. However, the days of openly dining on raccoon meat faded with tightening health and wildlife regulations. Today, consuming raccoons is strongly discouraged or explicitly illegal in many states due to serious concerns about rabies and parasites. Wildlife agencies emphasize that raccoons, those nocturnal bandits once invited to dinner, carry diseases that cooking doesn't always eliminate. The Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper missile toy, a marvel of the late 70s, brought the excitement of space battles to Earth. However, the small missile parts, designed to launch from the toy, became a source of grave concern following a choking incident that tragically ended in a child's death. This event in 1978 led to a swift recall and served as a critical lesson in the design and safety of toys with small detachable parts. It underscored the importance of foreseeing potential risks in toy design, ultimately influencing stricter safety standards and practices in the toy industry, ensuring that the imagination's flight does not come at the cost of safety. Sassafras trees are deeply cherished cultural items because of their solace in the symbolism of many cultures, as well as the infamous sassafras tea that we keep hearing people raving about. A cup of this in the 70s was all you needed to fix your soul and wipe away the exhaustion of last week. However, the tree and tea itself may not be so healthy. The tea at least contains a carcinogen called safrole, which is found in large amounts in the tea, thereby making it pretty unsafe as well as a bad idea if you have any pre-existing breathing problems. Besides, some studies found that the root bark of the tree and the oil it secretes can be linked to cancer or liver damage. Maybe we should reevaluate how healthy this piece of foliage is? Dinner parties in the 1970s had one dish that seemed to defy logic: the Savory Jell-O mold. A wobbly tower of gelatin, often packed with processed meats, canned vegetables, and a suspiciously artificial glow, it was a centerpiece of many tables. Whether it was ham and lime gelatin, chicken suspended in tomato aspic, or a seafood salad encased in lemon-flavored Jell-O, this culinary oddity was both a conversation starter and, for some, a challenge to eat. Jell-O molds had been around for decades, but after World War II, food companies aggressively marketed them as an easy, elegant way to serve meals. Housewives clipped recipes from magazines, creating gelatin-packed creations filled with everything from olives to pimentos. Processed meats like Spam or bologna often found their way into the mix, held together by gelatin and thickened with mayonnaise. It was a product of its time, efficient, visually striking, and heavy on artificial additives like food dyes and stabilizers. As food safety and nutrition research evolved, concerns over processed meats, excessive artificial ingredients, and sodium levels grew. By the 1980s, the popularity of savory gelatin dishes faded. Today, they're more of a retro curiosity than a dinner staple. In the leanest years of the Great Depression, nothing edible went to waste. Not even the parts most people today wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, like boiled squirrel heads. This peculiar dish, particularly favored in southern Appalachia, involved simmering squirrel heads slowly, extracting tender meat from cheeks and even brains, both prized as delicacies rich in nutrients. Preparation required patience, typically slow-boiled with salt, onions, and herbs until the meat easily slipped off the bone, a culinary adventure often joked about as the original head-to-tail eating philosophy. Eating squirrel heads wasn't merely a quirky rural curiosity, but a necessity-driven culinary solution. During times when meat was scarce, discarding any edible part was economically unthinkable. However, modern regulations strongly discourage consuming squirrel brains, not merely because it's unsettling dinner table conversation, but due to legitimate health concerns. Studies revealed a disturbing connection between squirrel brain consumption and a rare fatal neurological disorder known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a cousin of the infamous mad cow disease. The Austin Magic Pistol, a toy of the 1950s, exemplifies America's post-war innovation and the era's relaxed approach to safety, distinguished by its use of magic crystals that, when combined with water, propelled a plastic ball with a bang. This toy captured the imagination of many a young sharpshooter. However, its operation, essentially a controlled explosion, raised eyebrows. Classified as a firearm in numerous states today, the Austin Magic Pistol's fall from grace reflects a growing awareness of the need for stringent safety measures in children's playthings, a sign of changing times in American society. Speaking of traditions, one long-held custom in upper society and luxury cuisine was Beluga caviar, as you may have heard. The USA had an infamously high appetite for it, consuming around 60% of the world's caviar. But that meant that, like sharks, beluga sturgeons were not safe in their own waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to ban the buying or selling of any beluga products, as the fish today faces a serious threat of extinction because of overfishing. It might be tasty, but there's certainly no need to fish enough of them to wipe their entire gene pool clean. At least we think that's the sane take. Caviar is still one of the most widely consumed luxury cuisines in America, but beluga caviar has been effectively banned from mass production. Who knows? Maybe one day the rest of the caviar varieties may suffer the same fate. For much of American history, wild game meat wasn't just for hunters, it was for sale. In rural areas, local butchers and roadside markets offered everything from venison to wild rabbit, often sourced straight from the woods. No USDA inspections, no government oversight, just the trust that if a guy in town sold it, it was good. And for many, it was. Fresh, lean, and often cheaper than store-bought beef, wild game was a practical option, especially when grocery store prices climbed. It was prepared just like any other meat. Venison roasts, rabbit stews, fried squirrel, whatever was available, people knew how to cook it. Some families had a deep knowledge of butchering and preserving, passed down for generations. But the problem wasn't always in how it was cooked, it was what might be lurking in the meat before it ever hit the pan. With no inspections, there was no way to guarantee wild game was free from disease, parasites, or contamination. By the late 20th century, regulations cracked down, requiring all commercially sold meat to go through USDA inspection. While personal hunting remains legal, selling wild game without certification is now largely banned. In tough economic times, resourcefulness often triumphed over squeamishness, and few dishes captured this gritty ingenuity better than the infamous roadkill stew. During the Great Depression, families faced with empty pantries saw opportunity in freshly struck animals, deer, rabbits, raccoons, lying roadside, turning these unfortunate encounters into nourishing meals. After inspection, mostly visual, food safety rules were looser back then, The carcasses were quickly skinned, cleaned, and tossed into pots bubbling with potatoes, onions, carrots, and herbs. Cookbooks from the 1930s humorously cautioned cooks to select only recently deceased creatures, advising that tire tracks were a less than ideal seasoning. Surprisingly, this improvised delicacy wasn't just rural folklore. City folks, too, adopted roadkill recipes as an economical alternative to expensive butcher shop meat. Today, however, collecting roadside meals has moved from economical practicality to legal controversy. Many states now strictly regulate or outright forbid harvesting roadkill, citing health hazards from bacteria, parasites, and unknown diseases, not to mention wildlife preservation laws designed to prevent poaching disguised as scavenging. Super elastic bubble plastic was the stuff of legends, a whimsical toy that allowed children to create their own colorful, air-filled bubbles. Yet, beneath its vibrant allure lay hidden risks. The chemical composition of the plastic and the inhalation required to blow the bubbles raised health concerns, highlighting the complex balance between innovative play and safety. While captivating in its simplicity and creativity, Super Elastic Bubble Plastic's journey underscores the ongoing dialogue about the materials and methods used in toys, a conversation that continues to shape the landscape of play. Kasumarsu, luckily, was not an animal species that was almost wiped out, but a vintage Italian cheese that involved sheep's milk, which was heated and then curdled for 3 weeks. Now this gave it one hell of a flavor, and a sensation that other cheese just could not hold a candle to, but the process was beyond icky. Within 3 weeks of curdling, flies would be drawn to the milk and they would bombard it with their eggs, naturally turning into maggots. The maggots would then eat the milk, which had rotted a fair bit by now, and then let out some kind of substance that gave Kasumarsu its fame. For a lot of people, this might be too much, and that's definitely a fair hill to die on. Luckily, the government is one of those groups, and it banned this cheese for not meeting health. Canned tuna was cheap, packed with protein, and could be turned into everything from tuna salad sandwiches to casseroles. Families relied on it for quick meals, and no one thought twice about how much they ate. Back then, there were no warning labels, no recommendations to limit consumption, just endless recipes encouraging people to make the most of their pantry supply. But there was a hidden problem. Industrial pollution had been steadily increasing mercury levels in ocean fish, and tuna, being a top predator, was absorbing more than its fair share. By 1970, reports surfaced linking mercury in tuna to potential neurological damage, particularly in pregnant women and young children. The FDA took action, setting limits on mercury levels in fish, but there was no official warning on cans. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the government issued clear guidelines advising consumers, especially expectant mothers, to limit their intake of certain tuna varieties. Despite the concerns, canned tuna never disappeared from store shelves. It's still a go-to meal for millions, but with a little more caution attached. In an era when practicality trumped sentimentality, even the family pet wasn't always off-limits as a main course. Pet rabbits for meat became common during the Great Depression, as families raised them not just for fluffy companionship, but also as a convenient dinner solution. Surprisingly tender and mild-tasting, rabbit meat was commonly fried, stewed, or baked into pies after soaking overnight in buttermilk or vinegar to reduce gamminess. Because nothing ruins a Depression-era Sunday dinner quite like unwanted backyard flavor. Raising rabbits was uniquely economical, as these fluffy companions conveniently doubled as livestock, feeding on grass and garden scraps and multiplying at legendary speeds. There's a reason we still joke about rabbits' reproductive enthusiasm today. However, attitudes toward rabbits changed dramatically in post-war America. As people increasingly viewed these long-eared animals strictly as cuddly household companions rather than dinner options, cultural taboos strengthened significantly. Modern urban zoning regulations often explicitly forbid slaughtering animals considered pets, making it not just socially questionable but legally risky to prepare rabbit dinners at home in populated areas. The Water Wiggle by Wham-O, a seemingly innocuous garden hose attachment, promised endless summer fun with its erratic, water-spraying antics. Yet, beneath its playful exterior lurked hidden dangers. In the 1970s, the toy was linked to accidents and injuries, leading to its withdrawal from the market. The Water Wiggle's journey from backyard favorite to safety cautionary tale underscores the critical importance of evaluating playthings for all potential risks, not just those apparent at first glance. This episode in toy history serves as a reminder of the evolving standards of safety that guide the industry, ensuring that the laughter of children playing with water is not overshadowed by preventable hazards. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and don't forget to let us know if you've ever tried something from this list.